Good evening. Shares in Sanofi-Aventis have plunged in Paris today after an FDA committee advised US regulators against approving anti-obesity treatment Helvea due to possible links with psychiatric disturbance. The unanimous vote puts the drug's future in the US in serious doubt and is a major setback for Sanofi, which is struggling with a weak pipeline. The concerns have promoted a raft of broker downgrades, with analysts saying the integrity of Sanofi's guidance must now be in question. The world's third largest pharmaceutical company, however, remains confident that any side effects from Helvea can now be managed. Let's talk about this story. For more, we're joined by Andrew Fellows from Helvea and Jeffrey Kraws from Crystal Research Associates. Andrew, let me start with you. How big a blow is this for Sanofi?
Well, I mean, I am surprised by today's market reaction, because obviously the delay on Helvea has now been with us for at least sort of 15, 16 months. So I guess there had always been some concerns about possible side effect issues or adverse effect concerns that the FDA might be worried about. In terms of potential peak sales, there was a range in the market, anything between sort of 1.5 and even up to 4 billion euros. So in terms of an actual real blockbuster, this was one potential, which is now removed.
Jeffrey, were you surprised by the market's reaction today?
Well, I thought the market would be a little harsher. I concur with Andrew. This was a potentially blockbuster drug, one that could have joined two other drugs on the market, in a class that spent $92 billion in medical spending on the obese population. So this could have been a huge drug for them. This is the second time the drug's been dinged. It was dinged in February for smoking cessation, and it was dinged again now. So indeed, the credibility of management is in question.
Andrew, that's the other question here, really, isn't it? Sanofi was very positive, extremely positive going into this review, and yet we had a unanimous decision against.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, the problem with these companies is, though, that when you have a limited pipeline, you basically have to make the best of what you have and really not to admit to any possible deficiencies and really sort of portray the thing in the best possible light. So I guess that's why they had been hoping, and obviously the drug was already approved in Europe, so they had some expectation that this should be approved in the US as well.
Jeffrey, is it all over? Will the FDA, the full FDA, go along with this panel's view?
I think it's likely that the full FDA will go along with the panel's view. The FDA is likely to recommend that they wait for the final study to come out in 2010, following up on the data that's come forth so far, to see if the remainder of the population not only lost 15 pounds, but if they also saw a doubling of their psychiatric side effects also.
Let's talk about the European picture and just discuss how the Europeans may review this. Is there any chance the regulators over here will go back and say, actually, we need to look at this latest data and maybe we'll take a more negative stance as well?
I think there's certainly a risk of that, and even without that risk, there's certainly a real risk that patients and doctors will sort of adversely react towards the prescribing sort of habits that are currently being seen. But even on the market already, the uptake in Europe has been quite limited. So sales have been in tens of millions of euros in the first few months. So it's not as if it's really got off to a great start already.
Jeffrey, what does Sanofi do now? It has a weak pipeline. And it still has the Plavix issue as well to deal with. Is M&A really the only option at this stage?
Well, I think there's two things to do. One, you can look to partner with some of the late-stage biotech companies, which definitely could benefit from Sanofi's presence. The second thing you could look to an outright merger acquisition, such as Bristol-Myers, which has been discussed for some time. I think that the last possibility, and they shouldn't rule this out, is not only to continue to work with the FDA to try and get this pushed ahead, but also to really look as to who the closest biotech partners are who really need their help, and partner up with them to try and get a late-stage product that can help bolster them moving forward.
Andrew, do you think they'll take any of those options?
Well, I guess the risk is, and the strong rumour here in Europe is that a merger or a tie-up with Bristol-Myers is probably the most likely, which is probably why the market reaction has been quite so strong today.
Jeffrey, let me just talk to you about risk, because it seems to me that over the last 10 years, the risk associated with owning drug companies has become so much greater. Is this why the sector in its entirety just continues to underperform, despite every fund manager telling me it looks cheap at this point?
Well, I think looking at risk, it certainly is a big factor. A lot of these larger pharmaceutical companies continue to need larger and larger products coming forth. And when you get a huge disappointment like this, as Andrew mentioned, it could have been a $3-4 billion drug as far as sales goes, it sets back your EPS projections for a considerable period of time. It's a very difficult product to replace. And risk, if you take a look at how tight the FDA has been reviewing drugs lately, is certainly a huge factor. I go back to $92 billion spent in medical spending on the obese population. However, you're basically looking at Meridian and Xenical out there in the marketplace. After the fen-phen redux issues, the FDA has been particularly tough in the obesity and weight loss drug area.
What do you think about that line? Because as I say, every fund manager seems to be positive on the sector, but it just doesn't move.
Well, I mean, I guess yes. I mean, of the large cap stocks in Europe, we've now come to a level where, for some of them, ratings have come down to really historic lows. But as we've said, I mean, earnings growth projections for many of them actually look quite limited. And that's really due to an undermining of earnings growth by generic competition and due to a fact that pipelines are really failing to deliver. So you're not seeing a refill of the pipeline, and especially for large companies with a sort of $30-40 billion sales line. It's very hard to fill the pipeline at the rate you really need to grow that sales line at 10% or so.
Well, let me ask you the question to both of you. Is the worst over for Sanofi at this point in time? Andrew, let me start with you.
Well, there are still some further hurdles. So there's really generic competition still to two key drugs, and there's a big pipeline risk. We don't know a lot about the pipeline. The risk could go either way. We could have a lot of positive surprise, but at the moment, there's low visibility on the pipeline. So there's a big uncertainty still over this stock.
Jeffrey?
I concur. There's a lack of visibility in the pipeline. There's the possibility of generic exposure. So if you're going to be in there owning it, you're probably going to be owning it because of a combination with another drug company at this section.
Gentlemen, let's leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, both of you, for your analysis. Andrew Fellows joining us from Helvea and Jeffrey Kraws joining us from Crystal Research Associates.